Hi, it's Katrina. Secrets of the ancient world are about to be revealed. Join me today for a journey around the world as I show you the biggest monument ever built, an ancient shrine revealed by a landslide, and real physical proof of the Crucifixion. Let's go! The Hidden City. There is a real hidden labyrinth under the earth that was only discovered relatively recently. In 1963, a farmer in Turkey kept losing his chickens. He was remodeling his house and they would disappear into a small crevice, never to be seen again. After some more digging, the man revealed a whole passageway hidden behind his house. And that was when the world learned of the ancient subterranean city of Derinkuyu. Over the following years, researchers slowly explored the ancient city, revealing a tangled network of tunnels, houses, passageways, and all kinds of things. It's now one of the most famous examples of subterranean architecture anywhere in the world. And it isn't the only one. Derinkuyu is the largest officially, though maybe not for long. Another subterranean city was found nearby in 2013 that might be even bigger. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Derinkuyu was once the ancient city of Elengubu. It descends roughly 300 feet below the Earth's surface with 18 different levels. Derinkuyu was an entire city complete with houses, stables, storage rooms, religious shrines, cellars, ventilation shafts, schools, you name it. The oldest mention of the city was written around 370 BC by Xenophon of Athens. In his book, he mentioned that the people in Anatolia lived underground in homes they carved out of these soft rock formations. But who actually started it? And how old exactly is Derinkuyu? According to the Turkish Department of Culture, Derinkuyu was built starting around 2,800 years ago by the Phrygians. The Phrygians appeared in the first millennium BC and were obsessed with carving things from rocks. After all, it was easier than building something from scratch. But of course, there are other possibilities. Some experts think Derinkuyu was built by the Hittite Empire in the 12th century BC to actually escape from the Phrygians. There have been artifacts found by both cultures, and the Phrygians built many other underground cities like it. Over the years, this area of Anatolia was constantly taken over by different empires over the centuries. But it was most likely during the 7th century, when Islamic raids began attacking the Christian Byzantines, that the city was used to its full capacity. It could house up to 20,000 people with big boulders that could be used to block passages, so any invaders could easily be stopped. Life underground couldn't have been easy, but it was definitely better than living at the surface during those times. There is now a new theory about the builders of Derinkuyu that relates to Göbekli Tepe. Göbekli Tepe is without a doubt the most mysterious archaeological ruin in the world. I know that you've heard about Göbekli Tepe already, especially if you've been watching this channel. But why is it so mysterious? Because Göbekli Tepe was built around 12,000 years ago, just before the biblical flood supposedly destroyed the world. It's considered the oldest temple on Earth, if indeed it is a temple. Many biblical scholars believe that Göbekli Tepe is a pre-flood structure, one of only a handful that still stand. Now, some scholars think Derinkuyu was built by the same pre-flood civilization responsible for building Göbekli Tepe. In any case, Cappadocia's subterranean secrets have not been fully excavated. With over 200 underground cities in the area, researchers have their work cut out for them. For whatever reason, after thousands of years, the city was abandoned and all but forgotten, until some missing chickens helped us find it again. A secret cave. In Britain, a landslide revealed a secret cave that nobody had seen since the Middle Ages. It was one of the weirdest and most incredible accidental discoveries of the last few years. And it all started with a bit of a rumble. A team of engineers with the railway were called in to remove debris from a landslide that occurred near the tracks in Surrey. The train goes through a tunnel here, and the landslide had dumped tons of dirt and soil from the embankment on the side. As workers secured the area, making it safe for the train to move through, they found the sandstone cave. I know what you're wondering. How could there have been a cave from the Middle Ages right next to a railway tunnel without anyone knowing? Nobody alive today knew, but someone likely did when the railway line was built in the 1840s. When experts arrived on scene and started investigating the cavern, they discovered it was once much bigger. Most of it collapsed when the original line was built almost 200 years ago. What started as a routine cleanup spiraled into a fully blown archaeological investigation. Experts at Archaeology Southeast believe the cavern was built as a medieval shrine in the 14th century. The shrine may have been connected to the Chapel of St. Catherine, which is also from the 14th century and happens to stand on the top of a nearby hill. Here's a picture of this small cave from Archaeology Southeast. Isn't it hard to believe that such a cavern was buried next to a railway? It goes to show how much the landscape of England has changed over the last few centuries. It's tough to see in the photo, but the cave consists of about 8 niches cut into its walls. These were likely cubbies that would have most likely been decorated with statues of Christian saints. There are still a few surviving carvings on the walls, including some dots and a Calvary cross. Experts believe the cave was made by the cult of one particular saint, but it's impossible to say which one. Or the other possibility is that the cave was a hermitage. It may have been the secluded home of a hermit who lived in total isolation for his whole adult life. Could you survive in a sandstone cave with no internet, no TV, and no friends? Just nature? Let me know in the comments. A Viking Marketplace. Researchers have found some new Viking stuff. Underneath a perfectly green and idyllic field in Norway is an ancient Viking marketplace. Scientists found the ruins of the forgotten trading hub by using the newest in ground-penetrating radar. This awesome discovery was made near the southern tip of Norway on the island of Klosterøy, about 200 miles from Oslo. The island was already a place of historical significance. The best preserved medieval monastery in all of Norway stands on the island. There are burial tombs that date back to the Iron Age, and now local historians have added a new feature from the Viking Age, a place where merchants from all over the world sold their wares 1,000 years ago. The discovery is brand new, so I'll tell you everything I know as of right now. Håkon Ryerson from the Norwegian Museum of Archaeology conducted the survey late in 2023. His team's radar instruments scanned below the ground near Utstein Monastery and identified traces of Viking structures. They also sent a team in with metal detectors, and you know with that you always find something good. However, I do have some bad news. The pristine fields are so close to Utstein Monastery that they are considered a protected historic site, and that means no excavations. Scientists can only scan the area and look at the pictures on their computers. Still, finding what was likely a marketplace has helped lead to a better understanding of the area. Researchers believe that this picturesque Norwegian island was a power center in the Iron Age between 500 BC and 800 AD, so over 1,000 years. Then, in the 9th century, the first king of Norway, Harald Fairhair, established a royal farm here, which likely led to the development of the buried marketplace. And now for a quick break, but first, it's shoutout time! I want to give a big thank you to Robert Klopstein and Butterfly10119 for supporting this channel. Thank you so much, guys! Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos like these. Time-traveling archaeologists. I'm going to introduce you to a pair of archaeologists who look like they were torn straight out of an Agatha Christie novel. The best possible way I can introduce you to Colleen and John Darnell is with a photograph, like this one here, taken by Emmy Park for the New York Post. Notice the couple wearing typical 1920s attire, like they were heading to a party at Gatsby's house. They dress like this every single day, which is part of their attraction. Go ahead and check out their Instagram account after this video, where they have hundreds of thousands of followers, and a few sponsors too. Being social media stars certainly helps fund their archaeological expeditions. And they do indeed excavate. It's just that when they arrive to a series of ruins, they are usually wearing white tie formal wear that you would expect to see on a vintage Nile cruise. They show up ready to search for artifacts in a 1923 Model T. The flashiness of the couple has rubbed other archaeologists the wrong way. They've been denounced as narcissists. Some have even called them colonialists, mainly for the way they explore Egyptian ruins wearing clothing from a time when Egypt was under the brutality of British colonial rule. But what kind of discoveries have they even made? Some very cool ones, actually. In 2017, John was on a team that discovered the oldest billboard-sized hieroglyphs in the ancient Egyptian city of El Kab. The hieroglyphs are from 5,200 years ago. They include hieroglyphs of a bull's head, some saddle-bill storks, and a bald iris bird. Each hieroglyph is almost 2 feet tall. That doesn't sound big until you put it into perspective that most hieroglyphs are less than an inch tall. When John said billboard-sized, he was being serious. The hieroglyphs were uncovered high above the desert, etched into the side of a cliff, with the font so big it was clearly meant to be seen from a great distance away. I bet you didn't expect to learn that billboards date back 5 millennia when you woke up this morning. Advertising and propaganda is nothing new. John Darnell discovered the enormous hieroglyphs while mapping an ancient series of road networks. The majority of large inscriptions he found were located along major roads that ran parallel to the Nile or out into the desert. These were roads leading from one big city to another, with what appeared to have been advertisements carved in hieroglyphics on massive stone outcrops. You couldn't travel from one city to another without being faced with giant messages. As for what the hieroglyphs said, nobody is really sure. Most of the billboard has worn away since 3200 BC. The Crucifixion confirmed? The crucifixion is sometimes a heated topic. There are 2 sides to the crucifixion argument. One side says that Jesus Christ never existed and so was never crucified. And the other side says that Jesus Christ was real and definitely crucified. From a scholarly standpoint, both sides offer evidence for their claim. I'm going to show you the evidence now so that you can decide for yourself if you think the crucifixion story is legit or not. I'll start with what the Bible says. On Good Friday, Jesus Christ was executed for treason. Jesus claimed that he was the king of the Jews and was sentenced to die for his blasphemy. Jesus was nailed to a cross, then taken down and buried in a cave. The entrance to his cave tomb was sealed with an enormous stone so that nobody would ever be able to steal his body. But the Sunday after, when Mary Magdalene visited his grave, the stone was moved and the tomb was empty. Putting aside any kind of paranormal activity or divine intervention, looking at the story from a purely scientific standpoint, where is the evidence that any of this happened? Professor Richard Dawkins once said that Jesus never lived at all. The late Christopher Hitchens once said the existence of Jesus was highly questionable. French philosopher Michel Onfray said Jesus' crucifixion was an implausible event. In 1980, Onfray made his case by saying that 2,000 years ago, Jews were not crucified. When a Jewish person was put to death, it was typically done by stoning. Onfray also noted that even if Jesus was crucified, he never would have been placed inside his own private tomb. Crucifixion victims were the worst of the worst, usually criminals of seriously ill repute. Jesus would not have been given a good or proper burial. If you're already convinced, just wait to hear the other side of the argument. According to the director of the Center for Public Christianity, Dr. John Dickson, Jews were perhaps the most crucified people in antiquity. The ancient historian Josephus said that when the Romans attacked Jerusalem, they crucified 500 Jews a day. 500 in a day? That feels like a lot. Josephus also claimed that 800 Pharisees were crucified in a single day, while their children and wives were forced to watch. The same event is detailed in the Dead Sea Scrolls. But can you really call that proof? Biblical scholars like Dr. John Dickinson try to use what's written in ancient texts as proof when, in reality, there's almost no archaeological evidence of mass crucifixion. But there is a tiny bit. In 1968, the remains of a Jewish man named Jehohanan were found, proving he had been put to death by crucifixion. The discovery was made in East Jerusalem by accident. A group of building contractors were hard at work when they uncovered a stone ossuary marked by a Hebrew inscription reading, Jehohanan, the son of Hagkol. The initial anthropological observations reveal that Jehohanan was crucified brutally. Scientists at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem found that he had his arms stretched out and his forearms nailed to a two-beamed cross. They even found one of the nails still driven through his heel, lodged in his bone. So, this scientific question is this really proof that Jesus was crucified? As of right now, it's the only evidence of a crucifixion ever discovered. It does date to the time of Jesus in the 1st century AD, but it's the only one of its kind. Who were the Celts really? Even if you're not into archaeology and history, you've most likely heard the term Celt or Celtic at some point, and your mind probably goes straight to Ireland or the basketball team. But who were the Celts really, and what was their religion of Druidism all about? And did you even know that they once sacked Rome? I hope you've got your notepad ready because you're going to learn a lot of interesting facts in a very short amount of time. I'll start with what survives today of the Celts. There are still 6 ancient Celtic languages spoken in Europe. There's the Gaelic group, including Irish, Gaelic, and Manx. Then there's the Brittonic group, including Welsh, Cornish, and Breton. The descendants of the Celts are primarily based in Scotland, Ireland, Wales, and Brittany in France. Now let's go back in time 2,600 years. Greek geographer Hecataeus of Miletus was the first to mention the Celtic people in the 6th century BC. Over the next few hundred years, mention of them increased. Greek and Roman writers started talking about them a lot. By reading through the ancient texts, scientists know that the Celts lived across a vast part of Europe, all the way from the British Isles to Turkey. But they weren't one civilization. The Celts were fractured into a bunch of different groups. You may have heard of the Gauls before, the people who lived in France and were considered savages by the Romans. They were one group of Celts. There were also the Celt-Iberians who lived in Spain. The Romans would have you believe they were nothing but barbarians, but the Celts were just as sophisticated as the Romans, just not as organized, and they weren't all about cities and walls and big government. A Celtic burial plot was discovered from 2,500 years ago in Switzerland that contained one of the most incredible ancient objects ever. It was a golden globe nowhere near as big as a standard billiard ball, yet it was decorated with 3,600 tiny granules of gold. The object is just one example of how great the Celts were at making things. The Celts were even better at conquering. In 390 BC, the Celts attacked and sacked Rome. They just walked in, hit the Romans over their heads, and took all their stuff. This was approximately 800 years before the Visigoths did the same thing in 410 AD. Although the Celts did eventually succumb to Christianization with the rest of Europe, they were originally Druids. Sadly, their ancient knowledge has been lost forever. In 43 AD, Roman scientist Pomponius Mela wrote that the Druids knew the size and shape of the earth. They knew how the stars moved in the sky. They had sacred groves where they performed rituals. But other than these simple facts, nothing else is truly known about Druidism. The dinosaurs that could fly. It's time to get prehistoric. Did you know that not all dinosaurs were birds, but all living birds are dinosaurs? That's right. All bird species alive today are the descendants of a group of dinosaurs that survived when the asteroid hit the planet. 66 million years ago, not all the dinosaurs were killed. A small group known as Peniraptorans weathered the disaster of the apocalypse. They soon evolved feathers and took to the skies. They weren't the only dinosaurs with feathers. Everyone's favorite vicious carnivore, the velociraptor, had feathers, yet it couldn't fly. Scientists have never been able to figure out why dinosaurs had feathers. What was the point? Scientists are stuck poking at fossilized skeletons in hopes of finding answers. They have figured out a few things. For example, long primary feathers along the tips of a bird's wing are either asymmetrical or symmetrical. Asymmetrical means the bird can fly, and symmetrical means it can't. How do scientists know this? Through exhaustive research. Ornithologist Joseph Kiat at the Field Museum in Chicago conducted one of the most incredible research projects ever. He studied the feathers of every single order of living birds. He looked at specimens from 346 different species preserved in dozens of museums around the globe. Birds like pelicans, penguins, hawks, hummingbirds, you name it. Through his research, he was able to put together consistent traits among birds that can fly. All birds that can fly have asymmetrical feathers and between 9 and 11 primary feathers. Flightless birds like emus and ostriches can have as many as 40 primary feathers. But what in the world does this have to do with finding out whether the T-Rex was really a giant bird or not? Because Joseph and his research team also examined 65 fossil specimens from 35 different species of dinosaurs and extinct birds. They were able to take what they learned from the first bird study and apply it to fossils from dinosaurs. Researchers now believe they have a reliable way to determine whether a dinosaur could fly or was stuck on the ground. The T-Rex obviously couldn't fly because it didn't have any wings, though it may have been covered in feathers. Scientists are hoping that with this new information, they'll learn how the first creatures evolved to fly, and also why animals with feathers have been the most successful creatures on planet Earth. A giant pyramid in a mountain. The biggest pyramid in the world is not in Egypt. It might be in China, but that's a whole controversial thing, and I talked about it very recently, so be sure to check out the other videos if you missed it. Anyway, the biggest official pyramid is in Mexico. It's not a myth or a controversy, it's a real pyramid hidden inside a Mexican mountain. Yet even when the Spanish conquistadors arrived, they didn't recognize it as an ancient monument. They thought it was a hill, and so they built a church at the top. Hernán Cortés and his Spanish army arrived in the city of Cholula expecting a brutal fight, but it wasn't a fight at all. It was closer to a massacre. Cortés and the Spanish conquistadors had been fighting against the Aztec for months. Many of them were suffering from strange diseases they had never encountered before, and many of them were dying of starvation. Even in such wretched shape, the Spanish were out for blood. They entered the ancient and sacred city of Cholula, where the indigenous Aztec had a holy pyramid for every single day in the year. The Aztec believed that by dedicating the city to their gods and fulfilling sacrifices, the gods would protect them from harm. The gods didn't protect them from anything. On October 12, 1519, the Spanish conquistadors butchered the religious zealots of Cholula. Historians estimate that 10% of the population was left dead. It took about 3 hours to murder 3,000 people who were essentially harmless monks. That wasn't the end of the brutality. The Spanish army pillaged everything they could find. They looted treasure from the temples and pyramids. Anything made of wood was burned to the ground. When the Spaniards settled in Cholula, they built over the ruins of the temples and pyramids with their own religious structures. If you've been to Cholula before, you already know what the city is famous for today. It's known for having a church for every day of the year. The Spanish copied the Aztecs' original idea. The cherry on top was the Iglesia de Nuestra Señora de los Remedios. This huge church was built at the top of a large hill overlooking Cholula as the supreme symbol of the Spanish's Christian victory over the Aztec. Not everything is as it appears, though. The hill upon which that great church sits is a pyramid. It's also ridiculously humongous. Its base 4 times larger than the base of the Great Pyramid of Giza. The pyramid in the mountain is also twice the volume of the Egyptian pyramid. Even though barely anybody knows about it, the Cholula Pyramid is the biggest in the world by a huge margin. It is 1,476 feet wide and 216 feet tall. It's not just the biggest pyramid, it's the biggest monument ever constructed by any civilization at any point in history. How's that for a title? Not even in modern times has a bigger monument been erected. Locals call it the man-made mountain. Because of the church at its top, the mountain also holds the title of being the oldest continuously occupied building anywhere in North and Central America. You won't believe what archaeologists found inside the pyramid. Keep watching because the rest of the story is coming up soon. Mysterious works of the Migm. An unusually dry summer in 2020 led to a lake in Nova Scotia's Annapolis Valley shrinking. When it shrank, the receding waters revealed ancient artifacts from the mysterious Migm tribe. 1,500 years ago, someone sat down and started working on what may have been an arrowhead or a spear tip. They took the material from a quarry that was used by the Migm to make their weapons and tools, but they never finished it. Halfway through, they looked at their work and threw it on the ground. Or maybe they threw it into the lake. Nobody picked it up again until someone found it during COVID. Aaron Taylor, an archaeologist who teaches at St. Mary's University, called the artifact a beautiful, well-worked piece that the artisan gave up on. He doesn't know why, but they must have had a good reason. Aaron said whoever was making the sharp, pointy rock was responsible for whether their family ate or starved. Survival depended on how well certain tools were made. There must have been a flaw detrimental enough to toss the unfinished piece away. The artifact is only one piece of a much bigger mystery. Although the Migm are still around today, much of their history was lost during colonization. Who were these ancient people before the arrival of Europeans? Aaron is one of the lead researchers trying to piece together the history of First Nations people in Atlantic Canada. The Migm and their ancestors were around for 13,000 years. In the case of the arrowhead maker, the person likely lived in a small village at the edge of the lake that was home to 30 or 50 people. The village would have been connected to similar villages spread all the way across Nova Scotia to the Ohio Valley. Researchers believe the Migm used rivers like we use highways today. There are some who think they had trading networks stretching all the way down to the southern United States. The Shaman mummy of Siberia. In the remote Yakutia region of Siberia, a place so cold you can literally freeze your whiskers off, scientists discovered a mummy. They found the remains of a Siberian shaman still fully clothed inside his sarcophagus. If you didn't know there were shamans in Siberia, you're in for a surprise. Yakutia isn't just a region of Siberia, it's the homeland of the Yakut, who, much like the Migm, lived in their ancestral lands for millennia before the arrival of Europeans. When Russia took over the area in the 17th century, they started converting indigenous groups to Christianity. Orthodox Christianity, to be precise. Still, the Yakut clung to their old ways. It wouldn't be until the Soviets came to power that the Siberian shamans became brutally persecuted. Even so, the remoteness helped them keep their old ways. The religion never died, but went underground. Alexandra Prokopieva from the Russian Academy of Sciences said the team discovered a burial site from around the 18th century. Inside was the partially preserved body of a man. Laid on top of his mummified corpse were pendants of iron and copper. But the really exciting part was the suit that he wore. It was a traditional shaman suit of fur, a patchwork of leathers, leggings, a kaftan, a thick belt, and iron buckles. I would show you what the shaman looked like, but there aren't any pictures. So hopefully you enjoy what I managed to put on the screen here for you. Alexandra said shamanism is still going strong in Yakutia today. Out of respect for practitioners, she doesn't distribute photos of these types of burials. He's one of only 2 preserved shamans ever found, and the only one discovered wearing traditional shamanic attire. Shamanism itself is still practiced throughout much of North Asia. It involves shamans communicating with the spirit world. Shamans fall into trances, move through different states of consciousness, and manipulate spiritual energy. Shamanism is all about healing, divination, and harmonizing with the natural world. Inside the Pyramid of Cholula. You learned earlier how huge the Pyramid of Cholula is, and you already know that the Spanish didn't even realize it was a pyramid 500 years ago. What I neglected to mention is that nobody, not even locals, knew it was a pyramid until the construction of an insane asylum in 1910. The insane asylum was to be built at the base of the pyramid. Soon after digging started, the workers were shocked to find ruins. Over the next few decades, archaeologists carved roughly 5 miles of passageways along the edges of the humongous pyramid. Visitors today can walk through those passageways, looking at the crumbling stone walls of the biggest megalith on the planet. It's almost like a ride at a theme park for how big it is. But how did the Spanish miss it? The answer is simple. When they arrived, it was already more than 1,000 years old and overgrown by natural vegetation. The pyramid was already so ancient that it was entirely concealed under a thick blanket of grass and trees. Even the Aztec didn't realize what it was. If it wasn't the Aztec, who built the pyramid? That is part of the mystery and intrigue of Cholula. Some of the earliest excavations revealed deformed skulls and the heads of decapitated people. A small piece of pavement was dug up in 2013 during a drainage repair, revealing 63 skeletons from before the Spanish arrived. Almost all of Cholula seems to be riddled with skeletons. One rumor is that the pyramid was built by a giant, or by many giants. It's not that difficult to fathom given its size. But what about age? Scientists have had a difficult time dating the pyramid because it's like a humongous Russian doll. There are at least 6 layers built one on top of the other, with some of the earlier layers dating back to 300 BC. But it could be even older. These days, the pyramid builders are known as the Choluteca. David Carballo from Boston University believes they were a multi-ethnic group who arrived in Cholula around 2,500 years ago. Whoever they were, they had a lot of money and a lot of power. But where they went, how they were forgotten, and what their pyramid was for are all unexplained mysteries. The strange lady and her spiked throne. The Lady of the Spiked Throne is one of the craziest artifacts I think everybody should see at least once. The relic comes from the 3rd millennium BC, making it roughly 5,000 years old. It was made by the Indus Valley civilization of ancient India. The Indus Valley was, along with Sumer, one of the first civilizations at the dawn of humanity. Yet far less is known about them because they didn't write much down. This particular relic appears to be a vehicle. It's unclear where exactly it was found. Italian archaeologist Massimo Vidale was invited to look at it in a private collection in 2009. The artifact shows a woman seated in a position of power. She sits upon a spiked throne in what looks like a chariot made from the hollow body of an enormous bull. It's even weirder because the mysterious lady and her crew all have elongated heads. They also have beaked noses and bulging eyes like insects. To be frank, they look a little like aliens. It's the only artifact of its kind, making it very unique. However, who is the woman in the throne? And is she even human? It remains the subject of debate. Thanks for watching! Which discovery was your favorite? Let me know in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and stick around for an older video you might have missed.
The Fanged Whale. The skull of an ancient predatory whale was discovered in the middle of nowhere in Peru. This deadly marine mammal lived 36 million years ago, a time when Peru's Ocucaje Desert was underwater. According to Rodolfo Salas Gismondi from the Department of Vertebrate Paleontology at the Natural History Museum in Lima, the animal was one of the biggest predators of its day. It's been nicknamed the Ocucaje Predator for how fierce it once was. Its real name is the Basilosaurus, and it was at the top of the food chain. The creature grew to be 55 feet long and had enormous jaws filled with sharp teeth. This allowed it to take down fish, other prehistoric whales, and even apex predators like sharks. Thankfully for paleontologists today, one particular Basilosaurus died and floated to the bottom of the ocean, where it became preserved in sediments. The Ocucaje Desert is a hotbed for paleontologists who want to study these type of marine animals. Because it was once an ocean, and because it's now a flatland of a desert, it's relatively easy to dig up the bones of prehistoric monsters. The Akala Monastery. In the north of Armenia, just a few miles from the border of Georgia, in a genuine no-man's land, is one of the most fascinating monuments to Christian history anywhere in the Caucasus. The monument is called Akala Monastery, and it's situated on a plateau overlooking a river. It was once hidden inside the walls of a major fortress, but that fortress has since been destroyed. The history of this monastery begins in the 10th century, 1,000 years ago. The location was perfect for a major defensive structure to help protect the Tashrat kingdom against invaders. 2 centuries later, the Princess Migm of the Crucifixion clan ordered that a church be built inside the fortress. This became the Church of the Most Holy Mother of God, and it became so popular that the fortress transformed into a monastery. In the 14th century, the building fell into the possession of the Georgian Orthodox Church. 100 years later, a small settlement was established just at the base of the monastery. It was invaded by foreigners twice, and in the 18th century, the dome of the central temple was destroyed. Shortly after, the monastery fell into ruin. After 900 years of safety, it was abandoned and left to rot. There's nobody left at the monastery, and the only people seen here are Greek pilgrims marching through the desolate landscape to mark the birth of the Virgin Mary on the 21st of September. Ruu Ruu, also known as Richborough Castle, is the ruin of an ancient Roman Saxon fort in the United Kingdom. Although nobody can agree exactly on the origins of the fortress, scholars agree it was probably the landing site for the Claudian invasion. This was the successful Roman campaign to conquer Britain in the year 43 AD, turning it into the Roman province of Britannia. At the time of the invasion, Ruu Ruu had a large natural harbor that made it an ideal spot for the Romans. They could bring in ships, they could use them as defense, and could bring in supplies from mainland Europe. Once the invasion started paying off, the Romans began expanding their British Empire out in all directions from this single port. There were connections to Canterbury, Dover, Lympne, and Reculver. After some years, as the Romans pushed farther north, Ruu Ruu became a commercial town. It was so close to Europe that the Romans imported white marble from Italy to build a massive arch over 80 feet tall. This arch was considered the gateway to Roman Britain. By the year 250 AD, things started going south. The empire was under siege from the Saxons and the Frankish invaders, and Ruu Ruu was transformed into a military fortress. It survived up until the 5th century, when the Roman Empire completely fell apart. Then the whole place was abandoned. Today, it's a shabby ruin in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by farmland. And now for number 6. But first, want to give a big shout out to Terrelyn Gunshire, who has been enjoying our compilation videos. If you love longer videos and want to see a bunch of mysterious and strange discoveries, be sure to check those out and subscribe for more videos like these. A prehistoric drawing. In Egypt's eastern desert, archaeologist Mahmoud Tony made a shocking discovery. He was on an expedition going through one of the largest, awe-inspiring deserts in the world when he found a chunk of marble stone. This marble stone was covered in drawings that appear to be from the prehistoric era. Somebody, thousands and thousands of years ago, drew a hunting scene on a random chunk of stone. It survived in the Great Desert until now. The drawing is of a hunter. He's holding a weapon in one hand, led by a pair of hunting dogs. There's some kind of enormous beast running from them. The best guess anyone has is that the huge animal was an Arabian oryx, one of the most hunted animals in prehistoric times. The discovery is fascinating because of the drawing's location in the middle of nowhere. There are no archaeological ruins and no traces of civilization, just a rock on the ground with someone's drawing on it. But it's also fascinating because it gives some insight into prehistoric times in Egyptian deserts. Thousands of years ago, the eastern desert wasn't the middle of nowhere at all. There was plenty of water, trees, and plants, and the place was bustling with hunters and wild animals. Ruins in Israel. Drone footage recently helped to uncover a set of ancient ruins. The ruins were built 2,200 years ago during the 3rd century BC, or what historians call the Hellenistic period. It was the Idumeans who made these mysterious structures in Israel's Shephelah region, a place of low hills between the mountains and the coastal plains. After archaeologists scanned the area using their remote drones, identifying the site for the first time, they went in with their hammers and chisels to do an excavation. What they uncovered is pretty fascinating. They found 2 stone altars in one of the rooms, with one of the altars carved in the likeness of a bull. It was around this time that researchers realized they were standing in what was once a magnificent temple, originally held up by towering pillars. The bull was likely a god worshipped by the Idumeans. But here's the thing, nobody knows who the deity was. There are so few Idumean temples left standing that they can be counted on one hand. These people were descendants of the biblical Edomites, desert nomads who roamed into the mountainous region beyond the Dead Sea and settled there, but they were crushed by Judas Maccabeus around the year 100 BC. He forced them to assimilate with the Judean population. The last Idumean vanished 2,000 years ago, and hardly anything about them has survived. That makes this temple an extraordinary discovery in the middle of a hot and grassy desert, and all thanks to new drone technology helping out archaeologists. The Sumela Monastery. The Sumela Monastery is located high up in the Mela Mountains of Turkey, an ancient Greek Orthodox monastery dedicated to the Virgin Mary. It was built in the 4th century and is one of the most isolated, oldest, and mysterious monasteries in the world. It's amazing because the monastery isn't even located in a Christian country anymore. Turkey has long been a majority Muslim nation, and it shows just how much things change over the centuries. The monastery faces the Altyn Dere Valley in the Trabzon province, and its origins are unclear. One story says the monastery was founded by a pair of priests from Athens during the reign of the Roman Emperor Theodosius I. This was around the year 375 AD. It remained a remote Christian outpost up until around the 13th century, when it received riches from the Empire of Trabzon, established in the region in 1204 AD. The monastery became even richer in the 18th century under the Ottoman Empire. In modern times, it became even more splendid. Larger buildings were installed, magnificent decorations were brought in, and gifts were sent from Greek Orthodox communities all across Turkey. It was in the 19th century that foreigners began to visit the majestic monastery, standing nearly 4,000 feet above sea level. In 1923, the monastery was deserted following the forced population exchange between Greece and Turkey. Then, in 1930, a terrible fire burned through the monastery and caused major destruction. All wooden parts of the structure were destroyed. Today, the monastery is a rare historical building in the middle of a barren, mountainous region. Jug in a cave. An American-Israeli named Roddy Brown, currently living in Israel, discovered an artifact from 5,000 years ago totally by accident. He had gone for a hike with his friends near the Dead Sea when they decided to climb into a remote cave for fun. The cave is known as Cave 53, and it was the site of an archaeological dig a few years ago in 2017 by researchers with the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. The dig revealed pieces of jars, very old olive seeds, and even some scraps from an ancient scroll. Everyone was quite surprised that so many artifacts had been found, considering there had already been a previous excavation 30 years before that. The original excavations 3 decades ago had revealed pieces of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Nonetheless, Brown and his friends went to check out the isolated cave. Without even trying, they came across a fully intact jug. That may seem kind of boring, a plain old jug made from some kind of clay, but it's 5,000 years old. Somebody, thousands of years before Judaism was even a thing, before the Roman Empire, and before the Dead Sea Scrolls were written, someone left a jug inside this cave. Finding such an artifact is like reaching directly into the past. Ancient boomerangs. If there's one thing synonymous with Australia other than kangaroos, it's got to be the boomerang. But what a lot of people don't realize is that boomerangs are actually ancient and go back thousands of years. Just recently, a pair of employees with the National Parks and Wildlife Service came across a small collection of boomerangs in a dry creek bed near Cooper Creek. If you know anything about Australia, you'll know this is about as middle of nowhere as it gets, apparently, because I've never been. The workers discovered 4 boomerangs, though not like any boomerang you've ever seen. These were non-returning boomerangs, meaning they could be thrown, but they wouldn't boomerang back. They were taken to a laboratory to be analyzed by researchers with the Australian Heritage Services. The artifacts came from between 1650 and 1830, only a few centuries ago. Now this has created something of a mystery. According to archaeologists, boomerangs go back at least 10,000 years, but these are much newer. What researchers are trying to figure out is why they were made not to return. What was the point of a boomerang that didn't come back to a person after it was thrown? Researchers believe they could have been used for fighting, perhaps for digging, or maybe even in some strange and long-forgotten ritual. Tashrat. Tashrat is one of the most isolated, middle-of-nowhere places ever. It's an ancient trading post located in Kyrgyzstan. Hundreds of years ago, the isolation of Tashrat made it a very popular destination for caravans traveling along the Silk Road. As you may know already, groups of traders, merchants, and travelers wandered along the Silk Road from China to the Middle East and then into Europe. To accommodate the explosion of travelers in the Middle Ages, outposts cropped up in many places. The more isolated the outpost, the more likely caravans were to stop and rest. Tashrat was built in the 15th century of pure stone at an altitude of over 11,400 feet. It's located in a snowy mountainous region near the Torugard Pass. To the north is another ruined fortress that almost nobody knows anything about. And other than that, there's nothing at all in the area. The ruins themselves consist of 31 rooms, each one in the shape of a dome, once used for accommodating traveling merchants. The truth is that very little is known about how Tashrat came to be. One legend says it was built by a father and son, and that the son fell in love with a traveling girl and abandoned his father. But that's probably just a myth. Nobody knows when the place was finally abandoned for good, but it probably happened slowly as the Silk Road became irrelevant in more modern times. These days, visitors to Tashrat have to be careful of altitude sickness since it's basically at the top of a mountain. Thanks for watching! What's your favorite ancient site in the middle of nowhere? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. See you later!